My day started off like any other. I woke up at the crack of dawn, cleaned up, grabbed some coffee, and kissed Hannah, my wife, goodbye while she was still half asleep. The house was quiet, the way I liked it. Then I jumped in my truck and headed to my job at the construction site. That's the thing about routine, you never see the cracks until something smacks you in the face. Today, the smack came courtesy of a text from my neighbor Joe. "Hey Nick, your garage door's open," he wrote. Weird. I distinctly remembered closing it before leaving. My brain tried to brush it off. A mechanical glitch, maybe? But something didn't sit right. Call it paranoia or instinct, but I told Joe to close it for me if he could. He agreed, but the uneasiness lingered like a bad smell. By lunchtime, I couldn't focus. The thought of that open door gnawed at me. I wasn't even sure why it bugged me so much, but it did. So, I told my foreman I needed an early lunch and drove home. As I pulled into my street, the unease grew into a full-blown drumbeat in my chest. There was an unfamiliar black sedan parked in my driveway. My gut twisted. It wasn't the plumber, it wasn't Amazon, and it sure as hell wasn't someone I'd invited. I parked my truck down the street and quietly walked to the side door leading into the garage. It wasn't locked. That's when my suspicions started feeling more like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sliding the garage door open as silently as I could, I stepped into the house. The air inside felt off. Shoes off, I crept toward the bedroom, my pulse thundering in my ears. The soft sounds coming from upstairs froze me in place for half a second. Then, like some sick cosmic joke, there it was. And then, like some sick cosmic joke, it happened. My wife Hannah, on all fours, with some sweaty stranger piled on top of her. His hand was gripping her waist like a trophy, smacking her ass between thrusts as she moaned like she'd hit the jackpot. I stood there in stunned silence, the image searing into my brain. Every fiber in my body screamed at me to barge in, flip the bed, and send both of them to the ER. But I didn't. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was that weird little voice of reason that told me getting arrested wasn't the kind of revenge I wanted. Instead, I pulled out my phone. Flash off, of course. I snapped a couple of pictures, his hairy back, her flushed face buried in a pillow, the sheets we'd picked out together tangled beneath them. Hell, I even caught a short video for good measure. It wasn't until I stepped out of the house, silent as a ghost, that the nausea hit me. Betrayal, rage, humiliation, they all crashed over me like a tsunami. But once the storm passed, I had one crystal clear thought: they're going to pay for this. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. And I sure as hell wasn't going to throw punches like some cliché daytime soap villain. No, my revenge would be cold, calculated, and something they'd never forget. By the time I got back to my truck, the initial shock had started to fade, leaving behind something far more dangerous: clarity. I sat there for a moment, staring at the pictures and video on my phone. Proof. Not just for me, but for anyone who might try to question my next moves. I wasn't about to let Hannah, and whatever his name was, walk away unscathed. I just needed to be smart about it. The first call I made was to Dave, an old buddy who happened to be a lawyer. "Hey Dave. Got a minute? I've got a situation." Dave's voice immediately dropped into lawyer mode. "What kind of situation?" "The kind where I came home to find my wife screwing some guy in our bed." "Jesus Christ, Nick." He let out a long sigh. "All right, what do you need?" "Guidance," I said. "We live in South Carolina. What's my best play here? I want to minimize the damage, and I want her to feel every bit of this." "Lucky for you, South Carolina's one of the few states that still takes adultery seriously in divorce cases," Dave said. "You've got the evidence?" "Pictures and video." "Good. Meet me tomorrow, and I'll walk you through your options. In the meantime, don't confront her. Play it cool. She can't know what's coming. Play it cool." "Right." I hung up and took a deep breath, forcing the anger back down. The truth was, I wanted to storm back into the house and rip them both apart. But Dave was right. This wasn't about satisfying my temper. This was about doing things the right way, so when the dust settled, I'd be the one standing tall while they crawled through the wreckage. The next step was finding a divorce lawyer. Dave pointed me to a woman named Laura Perkins, highly recommended and known for being ruthless in court. The kind of person you wanted in your corner when things got ugly. When I met Laura the next day, I didn't sugarcoat anything. I laid it all out, the open garage, the unfamiliar car, and the gut-wrenching scene in my bedroom. Then I handed her my phone, letting her see the evidence for herself. Laura didn't flinch. She scrolled through the pictures and video with the cold detachment of someone who'd seen it all before. When she finished, she set the phone down and looked at me. "Nick, you've got a strong case here. South Carolina courts don't take kindly to adultery, especially if you've got evidence. If we play this right, you'll walk away with minimal losses, maybe even some advantages." "And Hannah?" I asked. Laura's lips curved into a small predatory smile. "She won't know what hit her." That was all I needed to hear. Over the next few days, I started laying the groundwork for my revenge. I rented a cheap apartment on the other side of the city and moved some of my things there. The house technically belonged to Hannah's parents, so I didn't care about leaving it behind. What I cared about was making sure I had a clean slate when the hammer came down. Hannah, meanwhile, was oblivious. She still sent me texts and called like everything was normal. "How's work? Can you grab milk on your way home?" The audacity was almost laughable. I kept my responses short and neutral. No point tipping her off. When everything was in place, Laura and I arranged a meeting with Hannah at a local cafe. The look on her face when she saw me sitting there with my lawyer was priceless. She slid into the booth across from us, her eyes darting nervously between me and Laura. "What's going on, Nick?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to make me smile inside. I didn't say a word. Just slid the divorce papers across the table and leaned back, watching as she picked them up. Her face went from confusion to shock in record time. "Nick, I don't understand," she stammered. "Don't play dumb, Hannah," I said, my voice calm but razor-sharp. "I saw you with him. In our bed." The blood drained from her face. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Laura stepped in. "You've been served, Mrs. Carter. I suggest you review the terms carefully. Refusing to sign won't stop this process. It'll just make it messier for you." Hannah's hands trembled as she clutched the papers. "Nick, I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "I don't want your apologies. I just want you out of my life." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. This was the bed she'd made, and now she could lie in it, alone. Hannah didn't sign the divorce papers right away. Of course, she didn't. People like her never take responsibility unless you force their hand. By that time, I was already out of the house and making moves to protect myself. She could drag her feet all she wanted, it wouldn't change the outcome. A couple of days later, I got word that her parents had stepped in. Apparently, they'd agreed to pay for her lawyer. I wasn't surprised. Her parents were old money types, always ready to bail their precious daughter out of trouble. What they didn't know, though, was why she needed the lawyer in the first place. That's where I came in. I sent a little package to her parents. It included a USB drive with the pictures and video I'd taken, along with a short letter. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Jennings, I understand you've chosen to support Hannah in this matter, which is your right. However, I believe it's only fair that you know the full story before proceeding. The attached files should clarify the reasons behind my decision to file for divorce. Sincerely, Nick." I didn't hear back from them directly, but the fallout was swift. That day, Hannah called me, sobbing and furious. "How could you show that to my parents?" she screamed. "They deserve to know who they're backing," I said, my tone ice cold. "And frankly, I don't care if it embarrasses you. You earned it." Her cries turned into angry sputtering, but I hung up before she could say anything else. Let her stew in it. When the divorce hearing finally came around, Hannah and her lawyer tried every trick in the book to paint me as the villain. She claimed I was a bad provider, emotionally distant, even mentally abusive. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. The judge wasn't buying it. "I'd remind you, Mrs. Carter, that false testimony under oath is a punishable offense," the judge said after catching her in a lie about our finances. When it was my lawyer's turn, Laura calmly presented the evidence. Pictures, videos, timestamps, the whole package. She didn't just play her cards. She slammed them on the table and dared anyone to challenge her. The judge's face said it all. By the time Laura finished, Hannah looked like she wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. In the end, the ruling was exactly what I'd hoped for. The divorce was granted, and Hannah's plea for alimony was denied outright. The judge gave me 30 days to collect the last of my belongings from the house. Other than that, I was free and clear. Walking out of that courtroom felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in a dark tunnel. But it wasn't over yet. About a month after the divorce was finalized, I went back to the house to pick up the last of my stuff. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I saw that same black sedan parked there. The sight stung for about half a second before it turned into nothing more than an annoyance. Hannah wasn't home, so I grabbed my boxes and left without a word. A week later, she messaged me. "Can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at the cafe where I'd served her the divorce papers. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. The confident, put-together woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired. "Nick," she started, her voice shaky. "I've made so many mistakes. I don't know what I was thinking. I miss you. I miss us." She went on like that for a while, talking about how hard life had been for her since the divorce, how she regretted everything, how she wanted another chance. I just sat there, sipping my coffee and letting her ramble. When she finally stopped, I set my cup down and looked her dead in the eye. "Hannah," I said, my voice steady. "I hope you figure things out. I really do. But I've moved on, and there's no going back." The look on her face was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost. Life after the divorce was good. I focused on myself, new job opportunities, new hobbies, even a few dates here and there. Meanwhile, Hannah's life went into a tailspin. Her relationship with the other guy didn't last. Turns out, he was a real piece of work, a drug dealer who ended up getting arrested. Hannah got caught up in his mess too, facing charges for possession and a DUI. I heard all of this from her mom, who still kept in touch occasionally. She apologized for the way her family had treated me during the divorce and even invited me to her husband's funeral when he passed away. I went, not for Hannah's sake, but because her mom had always treated me decently. Seeing Hannah there, a pale shadow of her former self, only confirmed what I already knew: I'd won. Not because she was miserable or because her life had fallen apart. I'd won because I'd walked away stronger, smarter, and completely free of her and the mess she'd made. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes, it's about survival, and thriving in the aftermath.